Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Mike Talbot presenting today our webinar on building dialogue in difficult times. You're very welcome to join us this afternoon, where we have people from all around the UK and all around the world apparently to take part in our webinar today. So just very quickly, a word about me. I'm Dr. Mike Talbot. I founded UK Mediation 22 years ago on the back of a career as a psychotherapist. So my particular interest is in the psychology of conflict, especially what's so difficult about conflict. Why do we get so entrenched? What is it about processes like anger and shame that make it difficult to resolve conflict? And in particular, what is it that we need from an impartial third party when we seek support to resolve our disputes? So that's the sort of angle where I'm coming from as we talk today about building dialogue in difficult times. So here we are at an advanced point through our pandemic and two lockdowns, and we are seeing people coming back to work or working in very changed circumstances, or a new regime of a lot of working from home, remote working, restructuring people's roles and physical working spaces. And we here at UK Mediation we're getting an influx of calls and requests for support around these changed situations. And this is the thing that made us think today would be a good time to do this webinar all about building dialogue between people as we come into conflict with colleagues really in the workplace as a consequence of what's been going on over the last 22 months or so. One of the things that has been going on over the last 22 months is that I've not long had COVID, so please excuse me if I'm coughing and spluttering on you a little bit. I'm well now, you'll be pleased to hear, out of isolation and so on, back on my feet, but still just a little bit hoarse, so you may hear a bit of croaking today. So in any case, overview of what we're going to talk about today is this human resistance to change. What is it about change that we find difficult? So people in their working regimes, in their physical workspace, in their actual job descriptions, in who they're working with, who they're reporting to, we may have some resistance, there might be some reluctance to go along with the changes that have become necessary as a result of this global pandemic. And often this can lead to relationship breakdown, which is where our stuff comes in. So individuals who have different needs and aspirations, individuals who feel that their security has been compromised, that what they thought was their job turns out to be something rather different. They're sort of home working, remote working, face-to-face working, how their job is structured, the hours that they're doing, etc. This can lead to problems between people where inevitably we look at what the other guy has got and it can be a bit of an issue, it can break relationships. And so we're looking then at what's needed to mend a relationship. So from our point of view here at UK Mediation, what we do is we get people talking, we build dialogue, and we can talk a little bit about some of the elements of the approach that we would take from within our model of dialogue building to mend the relationships that may have been damaged as a consequence of everything we're talking about, especially in relation to how we apply mediation skills in this area. So we've got some video clips for you with a few of the elements of a mediation case which is addressing a conflict that has arisen as a result of some change between two colleagues. So we'll be illustrating some of the points I make with the video of the use of some mediation skills. So about half of today is video clips with a bit of narrative from me in between. So I hope you enjoy what we've got to present for you today in the webinar, and we'd really enjoy your comments, please, questions, observations, and if you would like to do that, there is a chat box in the facility, so you are welcome to comment, question. I'll leave a bit of time at the end as well. I'll be talking for around about 40 to 45 minutes, and we'll leave a few minutes at the end for a bit of a Q&A. So here we go. So initially, let's think about this change thing, resistance to change. I think as a species, we do like predictability, and we like to know which way is up. We like to know, in particular in the workplace, what our jobs are. What's the nature of the job description, the duties that we have to do. And if these things change, there can be consequences to that, and also who we report to. So in times of restructuring and realignment and reorganisation, it might be that our line manager has changed. Perhaps we and other people are finding that the person to whom we used to report is not the same person. And also the general trajectory of our career may have been affected, especially through pandemic, in terms of where we're heading. And we like to know what kind of trajectory our career is on. We like to have a path, we like to have progression, we like to feel as if our skills are being used to the maximum benefit. And if this is compromised, this can be quite an anxiety-provoking situation. So all of these things are those sort of predictable aspects of what we do at work, what our job is and who we report to, and the general trajectory of our employment. And all of these things might well be affected by the pandemic, by the changed work regimes, by us coming back in after lockdown, by finding we've got more home working or more remote working, etc. And what this is all about is that these kinds of changes can lead to conflict, especially when we feel that our jobs are being restructured regards duties or hours or location, and not least as well when we have this sort of reconfiguration of our jobs, so who we report to, but also who they report to. So we may find we're not actually in the team that we thought we were in, and our line manager may, his or herself, be reporting to somebody else. We may even find that our job's been redesigned and we feel either overworked or underutilised. And we certainly, here at UK Mediation, we're having a number of situations of team mediation, where there are situations that have arisen at the end of the pandemic, at the end of the last chapter of lockdown, where people are coming in and finding that they, in their experience, they're doing more than one person's work. Other people are thinking, well, where's my job gone? And they're feeling quite underutilised. So changes in your duties, a sense of not being fully used or actually being overworked, can give rise to all sorts of problems within teams and in between particular individuals as well. I think we are not only a little conflict averse, a little change averse, I mean to say. I think people are inordinately flexible, and we're seeing a great deal of flexibility and understanding and compromise going on at the end of pandemic. But I think for some individuals, particularly if their relationship with a colleague was not great before, are finding that in fact things are a little bit strained between them and a colleague. So let's put some flesh on those bones and think about a conflict build-up between two colleagues. So we're going to see an illustration on video of two colleagues, one of whom has just come into a department following a restructure, and the other colleague who's been there quite a long time. So we're going to be seeing two characters here in the conflict build-up, Heather and Sally. Heather's been there a while doing the accounts for this company, and Sally's relatively new to the company, and this is giving, new to the department rather, and this is giving rise to some tensions between the two. Heather's not fully confident that Sally should be there anyway, and as we'll see illustrated in this video clip, there's a bit of a clash between their styles, and this is giving rise to a bit of a dust-up between the two of them.
Sally and Heather work together in the accounts department of Connors Plumbing Supplies. Heather has been in her role for some years, while Sally has only recently joined the department following a reshuffle. There is some bad feeling from Heather over Sally's appointment, with Heather claiming that Sally only got the job because of her friendship with James, the departmental manager. Sally and James had worked together over a number of years before the current reshuffle. Sally claims in return that Heather over-scrutinises her work and her timekeeping and is cold and unfriendly with her. The two have quite different approaches to work, and this has begun to cause some tension. James has no issue with the two of them getting the job done, but has needed to speak to them separately about the importance of getting on together. They continue to rub each other up the wrong way, and there is often an atmosphere in the office. It is Tuesday morning, a few days before the deadline for an important report to be completed. Sally is on the phone to her friend.
Hey Liz, yeah, it's nice to talk to you. Yeah, I was just ringing to find out what time we're going to meet for the theatre on Tuesday. Yeah. We go for about 1:30. Perfect. Yeah, it'd be fantastic to see you then. Oh, actually, do you want to go for a coffee first? That would be great.
Oh, for God's sake, it's not like it's even dinner time or anything.
Yeah, 1:30, Liz. Yeah, that'll be absolutely fine. Okay. All right. Bye. What are you doing at the weekend?
Nothing special.
Oh, we're going out with Phil. It's his birthday. Do you know Phil from sales?
Yeah.
It's his 50th. Would you like to come along?
No, it's all right. It's not really my kind of thing.
Oh, it's his 50. You should really enjoy yourself. Come on, you're fantastic time if you come.
Look, I said no, I don't want to go. We've got this important report to get finished. Perhaps we should be getting on with that instead of organising our social life.
Well, oh, has she had a second baby yet? Oh, that's lovely. She had a little boy. What's she called him? Oh, that's really nice. Hold on a minute.
Sorry to interrupt. How's your part of the report going?
Yeah, getting it done.
Do you think you'll have it done by tonight? Only I've got mine finished and I need to work yours into it.
By tomorrow. Yes, hi Ruth. Sorry for the interruption.
Sorry, Sally, I've not finished.
Sorry Ruth, I'll have to ring you back.
You've been on the phone for nearly 20 minutes. You could be doing your report then.
I'm
before
on the
that, you
phone
had a break.
to Ruth from Albright.
Well, it doesn't sound like it. You was on for at least 20 minutes and before that having a break.
Is that right? That's the crux of it, isn't it? You are constantly monitoring when I go for my break. You think you're in charge, well you're not. You're always evaluating what I'm doing and timing when I have my breaks. I've had enough of it.
No, I don't. You're just being bloody childish now. For God's sake, can you just get your part of the work done? I've had enough of this. You're an absolute nightmare. I'm going to have to speak to James.
Heather goes to see James to complain about what she sees as Sally's lack of commitment to the job, distracting behaviour and disregard for important deadlines. James spends some time with Heather and then asks to speak to Sally, who tells James that she is upset about aspects of Heather's manner towards her. Later that morning, James gets them together for a joint conversation, partly about the day's events, but also about the more long-standing conflict between the two of them. James has previously spoken to the two of them about their working relationship and feels that he has done all he can. He proposes that they try mediation to build a better understanding of each other. An external mediator is brought in. He starts by seeing the two colleagues separately with the intention of getting them together later on.
So clearly following this reorganisation with Sally coming into the department, much to Heather's disgust and chagrin, Heather's not at all happy about it and they're nitpicking with each other. Everything the other does is winding the other one up. And clearly their communication's not great, very different working styles, and the reconfiguration is causing some significant problems for these two. So what we're seeing is that the change is challenging for the pair. It's been foisted upon them. Sally seems sort of wide open to it really and seems to have sort of settled in very, very quickly to the point where she's relaxed enough to be doing personal calls at the desk, eating at the desk, etc., which is maybe how she's worked previously. Perhaps that was the culture of where she came from, but from Heather's point of view, this is an interloper. She feels she shouldn't really be there, and the symptoms of it are clearly that there's nitpicking, there is attacking one another's personal habits and working styles. It's clearly very destructive to the relationship. So the relationship breaks down. Now, what's the people need? I got in brackets here to know what's a given and what isn't. And often the situations that we work with here at UK Mediation is they're characterised by people saying, well, I want a new manager. I want that person out of the department. I don't want to work in that department anymore. I need to be relocated. And I think the important thing when we're looking at conflict resolution with people following restructures is that there are givens and there are things that are not givens. So it's a fact that Sally and Heather are going to be working together and they're going to be reporting to this manager, James. Heather is alleging that there's favouritism or nepotism here and that Sally was only given this job within the restructure because she's matey with James. But the fact is they are going to be working here, they are going to be reporting to James, that's the given. What isn't a given is how they conduct themselves. So I think within the use of conflict resolution skills, mediation skills, whatever we want to call it, I think it's helpful to realise that there are some things that are fixed and are not going to be rearranged as a result of this kind of conflict resolution approach. And as we build dialogue between the two parties, hopefully where they get to is a realisation of the impact of one another's habits, behaviours, style of communication, ways of working on the other party. So each of them realises the impact of their words and behaviours on the other party, and the given is how they might then choose to adjust their behaviours so that they can collaborate better and get on better in the fait accompli of this reorganised and restructured workplace. So the kind of thing that's required, what the people do actually need in terms of our approach towards dialogue building, is first of all a good listening to. I think what each of the parties needs is to be heard, to have some empathic listening, to make sure that we, as the third party interveners, as it were, have given them a good listening to, made sure we've heard impartially both people's side of the argument as we begin to try and resolve things between them. Now, I'm not suggesting that for all of these situations you bring a mediator in, not by a very, very long chalk. And it's always helpful for a concerned manager or concerned colleague sometimes, a concerned HR professional to sort of roll out some of these skills themselves. There's no particular need to bring a mediator in if you have somebody who has the ability to facilitate a conversation between these two parties. And that facilitated conversation would always begin with a good listening to each of the each sides in the disagreement, with the intention of bringing about a productive conversation. So we're hoping that either with an internal third party who can facilitate some kind of a resolution meeting, or with an external mediator if that's what's required, or if everything else has been exhausted internally, to actually bring about a productive conversation so that between these two people there is a mending of fences. Now, the other thing I would say as a caveat is that we don't need or expect people who work together, particularly if they've been foisted on each other, as in the Sally and Heather case, to get on like a house on fire. Of course not. We don't have to actually like our colleagues. We don't have to be friendly with our colleagues. What is expected is that we have a constructive, collaborative, collegiate relationship with people to the extent that we can get the job done. We're not drawing in management and HR resources all the time, and we're not producing conflict waves that ripple throughout the organisation. So what we do need at the end of a productive conversation between these two is some kind of a behavioural plan or a deal, so that they are able to conduct themselves in terms of what they do and what they say in such a way that their conflict is addressed. They're not drawing in the organisation's resources all the time, and they're not creating conflict waves that ripple out to other people. So let's break that down a little bit and think about, in this case, the manager has tried to bring the two parties together for a conversation. He has tried this a couple of times. It's not really worked. There are accusations of nepotism, that he's on Sally's side and this kind of thing. So what they've decided to do is to think about bringing in an external mediator. So that professional would be impartial and active in hearing both sides, hearing what's going on between them, how they've been impacted by the change that's been foisted upon them. Could have been by a pandemic, it could have been by financial imperatives, it could have been for all sorts of reasons. But the point is, to get started with this kind of process is to make sure that both sides get a good listening to, and we're going to have a think about the sort of offering the empathy, the attention to both facts and feelings, the emotional content of what's going on here, which is clearly running quite high with these two guys. And of course the practitioner taking into account their concerns, not agreeing with them, not taking sides, maintaining this impartiality, but ensuring that they get a good, active, empathic ear from the practitioner. And this is what we're going to see now as we see the mediator getting involved, afraid it's me again, in order to listen to Heather and see what's going on for her.
But generally speaking, the normal rules of your company apply.
Oh, okay. So
whatever,
I need to...
whatever would be required of your company whilst you're here or at your office or in the canteen or in the kitchen, it's the same as when you're in mediation.
Okay. No, that's fine. I'm happy
All
to
right.
sign. Yeah, I'm happy to sign that.
Thanks very much. So that's really the only formal thing I do. So I put that away, Heather, and I'll say start anywhere and tell me what goes on.
Well, I worked for this company for 10 years, you know, longer than my manager and certainly longer than Sally's been there. I never had any issues, you know. I go to work, I've always got my job and all the work done on time, handed in, never any problems. And Sally, I think it was about 6 months ago, the company had a restructure. They decided they was going to outsource the marketing department, which is where Sally worked. They created a sales department, so a couple of the people that was in marketing went over to sales, and then all of a sudden there was a new role as well created in accounts, which, you know, I don't think was needed. I've been doing all the work on my own, perfectly fine.
They were giving Heather a good listening to, so she needs to have a good old offload, talk about things from her point of view. The practitioner's job is to listen to Heather's account. The practitioner is listening out for where the open doors are, what it is that Heather needs, where there are possibilities to build dialogue with the colleague. Mediators not taking sides. Mediators are there to give an impartial listening to both sides. They're not proposing solutions. They're not suggesting what needs to be fixed. You'll notice the mediator's not asking loads of questions. He hasn't got a sort of a deductive route by which he's going to work out what needs to happen and then to sell it to the parties. It's just about starting with a blank slate, doing some good empathic listening, and then turning to the other party, Sally in this case, and making sure we do the same for her as well.
And there she is calling me names again, you know, and she does this often. She will claim that she isn't doing. She says that it's all about favouritism and that James only listens to me, but she's not actually giving a true picture of what she's doing and what she's saying and how difficult she's being about it. She doesn't want me there. Yeah. So it's a very, you can imagine the environment's very, you feel like you're on tenterhooks all the time. Okay. I feel very uncomfortable.
Okay.
And the reason I suppose you've come in is because it sort of came to a head the other week. We were in the kitchen. I'd gone in to make a cup of tea and I was on the phone to an accountant from a company. And while I was on the phone, she came in and she was trying to get my attention. So in the end, I pulled the phone away from my head and she saying, when's the report? You know, when's the report going to be done? What a bloody report. She goes on and on about this. If it's done 10 times a day, she's asked for that flaming report. I told her it would be done the next day, and I said that again and said, can you leave it for now? Because I was on the phone. But she wouldn't, and she sort of went on again. And you know, she just lay off, leave it. And she went mad. And she began calling me names. She called me a nightmare and that I was bloody childish. Well, to be honest, she's bloody childish.
Okay. So it sounds like it goes back to the time that you've come into the department from your point of view, you know, right back then.
Yes.
You know, you didn't feel particularly welcomed in, and you didn't feel as if...
I was welcomed, obviously, by the manager and felt that I was looking forward to the role.
Sure. Okay.
They were giving Sally a good listening to as well. So the point about hearing from both parties in this situation where we're trying to build dialogue between these two is give them a chance for a good old offload, the mediator to try and deduce their underlying needs and interests with the intention of building up to having a conversation between the two of them so that they can be brought together and the mediator can facilitate that in order to, after they've had a good listening to, bring about something approaching a productive conversation. So what we're doing in bringing them together, there's quite a bit to it, but just drawing out a couple of the strands that we do as mediators or as dialogue builders in order to bring about this productive conversation. We're trying to use reframing. So reframing is about switching away from what we hear there, which are basically a series of complaints and allegations. And what we want to do is to get away from the past, which they're not going to agree about the past. So what we need to do is think about focusing on the future. What do they need to do differently starting now in order that they can start to build dialogue and get back on the same page together? So we keep the focus very much on the future about what can happen from this point onwards in order that things are better between you, given the changed situation, given the fact that you've got to work together. So we're looking at switching the focus to the future. We're trying to get away from all of the allegations and the accusations and all of the gripes, what we would call positions. The positions are what people say has to happen. So you've got to do this, you're not going to eat at the desk, you're not going to keep nagging me about deadlines, you're not going to be making personal phone calls, you've not got to put your headphones on so that you can't hear me talking to you. These are all the very positional statements. So what we need to do as mediators or as dialogue builders is to think about what are the underlying needs. So clearly Sally's, one of her needs is to have a good mixture of the social and professional. She likes to have the chats with clients. She likes to be having the sort of the rapport building and the banter with their customers. Whereas for Heather, she needs these more concentrated periods of time And for Heather, she she likes the job to be done to a standard and on time. It's a real imperative for her is that things get done well in advance of deadlines and done with a high degree of accuracy. So there are certain things about what these two guys need. And just a little tangent here, it would have been established within the organisation that they are actually doing the job. There wouldn't be any question here or any need for any sort of disciplinary or performance issues to be addressed. It's the case now that this is about the interpersonal relationship, and the manager has already done whatever he can do in this case to try and bring them together. So we're now looking at, with the external agent, bringing about the productive conversation on the basis of these reframing of these aspects of these situations. So the future focus, the needs not positions, and trying to get them to a place where they are being more collaborative and not competitive. You can see from their initial chats there with the mediator that they're clearly quite competitive. It's about she's wrong, no, she's wrong, no, she's wrong. And we want to get away from that sort of banging their heads together to a more collaborative place where they're putting their heads together to come up with a more productive working environment. And it's about them coming up with it, not the mediator telling them what to do. So let's have a look at when we get them together then, and we'll be looking at the productive conversation about getting them together in a room with the mediator's help to try and facilitate and reframe, to remain impartial, to continue to listen empathically to the two of them. And we're going to hear from them individually when they get together. And as you might imagine, there's a bit of friction between them when they get together in the same room, but we're going to hear from them individually, hopefully, in this productive conversation, starting with Heather going first.
So if you're okay with that, then what I would suggest is, if I can hear from you both individually, if I could have one of you start to give you some uninterrupted time to talk about what's on your mind as you arrive this afternoon, and especially to talk about what you think needs to be discussed and what you want to get out of this, really. So if one of you would like to begin.
I would. Normally Sally's the one with everything to say, but
pause you a second. So Sally, are you okay if Heather goes first?
Why not?
You're all right with that, yeah? Okay, so Heather, we'll hear from you first. So it's to have some uninterrupted time to talk to me about what's on your mind and especially what you'd like to get out of this. And while Heather's talking, Sally, if you could please listen to what she's got to say and try and refrain from interrupting. And when it's your turn, I'll make sure Heather does the same for you. Okay? So Heather.
Well, obviously, as I said this morning, I'm just finding it impossible to work with Sally. Absolutely impossible. She came into the department 6 months ago, and since then it's just got worse and worse. She is constantly on the phone, not just to clients, to friends as well, people in other departments. She's extremely loud and brash when she's on the phone as well, organising a social life. It's hard to concentrate, and it's unprofessional as well, being like that with clients.
There's Heather's contribution, so that's what she's got to say when in the presence of Sally. And of course, in the interest of fairness, now we need to hear from Sally as well. So let's see what Sally's got to say when it's her turn.
So Sally, if I turn to you now, and thanks again for your patience while we heard from Heather.
Yeah.
So it's your turn to have some uninterrupted time to tell me about things from your point of view, what's on your mind this afternoon, but especially, what you'd like to get out of this.
Well, she was going on about my eating. It's ridiculous. I have to have small regular meals. And she's on about the fact that I'm taking crisps and then purposefully eating them in front of her loudly.
Just if I could just stop, if I could just stop the two of you. First of all, Heather, when it's Sally's turn, as it was when it was your turn, I'd please ask you not to interrupt.
Okay.
And to let Sally have her go. Sally, while you're making your comments, if you could make your comments directly to me, please, rather than to Heather. And the other thing, I didn't mention it earlier, but I would please ask you to refrain from sort of mimicking each other there. You were just beginning to do it. Right. And again, it is tricky, this. It is a hard thing to have to go through. But if you're mimicking each other, then that can go to a difficult place. So I'd ask you please to try and refrain from that if you can.
Okay. She's been It's been difficult since I first started here, and we've talked about this earlier, didn't we? She thinks the role was created for me through nepotism, you know, the fact I've known James, that we've worked together before, and the fact that the job was created for me.
Everybody knows that it was created for you, for God's sake.
And again, if you just pause a second. So for a second time, Heather, for a second time, please. I do need to be able to hear what Sally's got to say. You had the privilege of your uninterrupted time when I asked Sally to wait. Okay. So if you could just hold on until she's done. There's plenty of opportunity for the two of you to have a conversation afterwards.
Good examples there of why we need a facilitator at all. So it's quite clear that when they start to describe the issues from their points of view, there's quite a bit of friction between them. And this is clearly a symptom of an overdue conversation, as I would put it. So when people don't discuss the issues that are important to them, it tends to go into a place of anger and irritation like that. And clearly a couple of key words that Sally said there have pushed Heather's buttons. So it's the mediator's job, the facilitator's job, to try and get them to listen to each other, make sure that they get an equal chance to speak, and in a moment we'll give them an equal chance to respond. So after hearing from each of them individually, what we would tend to do as mediators in building that dialogue is then start to work on the issues between them. So we get them to have more of a conversation now with the facilitator having heard from them individually. So let's have a look at when they start to work on the issues between them. So we've fast forwarded a little bit through the session, and we've made a list of the kinds of issues that are contentious between them and trying to get this dialogue going between them. Again, with the mediator responding empathically, trying to treat them both equally, giving them an equal chance to speak and an equal invitation to respond, working around an agenda and looking at focusing on the future about what they're going to do around each of these contentious issues in order to try and rebuild the dialogue between them. So here we go into the part where we're actually working on the issues between Sally and Heather.
Which one would you like to pick now?
Time at desk, I think that kind of links in.
Time spent at the desk?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that then. So this was raised by you, Heather, when you started. You're talking about being able to get hold of Sally and having a sense of, you know, fair shares, but also if the stuff that the two of you are working on together, you've been able to find her and ask her things that you need to know.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, you're constantly getting up and going for breaks. I never know where you are. You know, we've got deadlines and things to meet.
Yeah, but it's not up to you to decide when I have my breaks.
I'm not wanting to decide when you have your breaks. It would just be nice to know where you are. I need work from you sometimes to be able to continue or to put in other reports, and I never know where you are.
Yeah, but you're micromanaging. It's almost like you're indicating when I can have a break.
You always bring that. I'm not dictating.
So let me just pause the two of you. So Sally, you're saying you don't want to be micromanaged.
No.
Well, I mean, I'm sorry if you do feel like you're micromanaged. That's not my intention.
No, you shouldn't be managing me at all.
Well, I'm not. But you have to appreciate I've got things to do that I need your work as an input into it, and I can't do it without it. But you're always off on breaks everywhere.
I'm not always off on breaks.
Let's face it, you're off quite a lot.
Well, there's a reason for that, isn't there? Because
you don't do your work.
I don't feel comfortable. It's freezing in our room. It's a horrible place to be, and I will spend as much time somewhere else as possible.
Well, why don't you just get a heater or something? You know, then you haven't got an excuse to be going off all the time.
I didn't mean it like that, and you know it. It was about how you are towards me.
I wouldn't say it's freezing. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. You know, it goes two ways, Sal. It really does.
So, Sally, would it be helpful for Heather to know the reasons, the sort of why you're away from your desk?
Well, sometimes I'm doing it because it's just so uncomfortable in the room, and sometimes I'm doing it because I'm going to go for a break and have a snack and a drink. Sometimes it's because I'm going to find somebody to have a quick chat with about something.
Okay. Yeah, about me most of the time.
Because you're saying, Sally, you know, you don't have much interaction in the office, so actually you go off to get interaction with other people.
Yeah, I'd go mad otherwise.
Okay. So Heather, would it be a useful thing for you to tell Sally why it's a problem to you when she is away from the desk? What impact does it have when Sally's not around at her desk?
It's purely, I mean, I'm not bothered when she has her breaks. You know, I'm not, but if I've got things to do, it's just common courtesy just to let me know that you're going off on a break. You know, if I'm in the middle of something and then I look up because I need some input and she's off and then I can't get hold of her. You know, I go to the usual places. I'll go in the kitchen, she's not in there, or I'll go up to sales and she's not. I don't know where she is. I've not got ages to spend running around looking for you when I've got work to do.
But you're telling me I can't, I've got to be away from my desk to eat, and now you're telling me I've got to be at my desk to do
don't
my
be
work.
so facetious and childish, honestly.
So Heather, when I hear you use that kind of language, I'm thinking this is what led to the current situation. So really what I'd like you to do, please, is to try and refrain from words like that, especially things like childish.
Fine.
And that way we can be sure that we're moving forwards, you know, and getting away from the point where we did begin today, and into a rather better place. Is that going to be all right for you?
Okay.
But just to try and catch that bit of discussion between the two of you, you need to be able to get hold of Sally when you want her and ask her questions. Sally, you like to be away from the desk, stretch or break or go and have a, you know, an interaction with someone or have a snack. Yeah. So what can the two of you do about this?
So quite a few things going on there, and this is clearly just extracted from a wider conversation, but the few of the things in there are about having some rules for their conversation. So we're trying to build a dialogue within a respectful environment, and we do have some rules in terms of taking it in turns to speak, no name calling, no deliberately inflammatory language, nothing that could be heard as being personally abusive. And what you saw there is the facilitator applying some of those rules, doing so fairly and equally to both sides, with the intention of keeping their dialogue moving forwards and not getting too entrenched into just trying to hurt each other or trying to run each other down. And all the time stating and restating each party's needs. So making sure that they're hearing from one another what it is that the other party wants. What you need is this, what you need is that. How are you going to do it? And this is how we take the conversation into a place where it's actually more of a behavioural plan or a deal. So the idea is not just that we have a chat, it is that we come up with an output of a deal around their behaviours. Behaviours are what we do and what we say. And this is as they negotiate between themselves, we want something that's going to be smart and arrived at fairly, so it has to be specific and measurable, etc. And they need a sense that they are both contributed equally to it. So this is why you see the mediator doing what he's doing there and making sure they both have a chance to contribute, get a similar amount of time to speak, work within some rules, keep it moving forwards, keep it based around their needs the whole time. And we need to know that they have entered voluntarily into this, so that they have a sense that this is because they want to patch things up. Again, they don't need to be friends, they don't have to want to be friends, but they do need to voluntarily participate in this process. Otherwise, they won't stick to the deal, they won't make the agreement work, they won't put their shoulder behind it, and it will just be a piece of paper that they ignore because they feel they've been pressed into it. And it's private as well, so they keep that agreement to themselves. It's only disclosed with their consent. In order that you know, they can keep things discreet, private between them. Often people do things they're a bit embarrassed about when they get into disputes with other folks. They say things, they do things that they would rather not be reminded of, and they maybe have had to talk about these difficult things in quite a vulnerable way in these conversations. So they are at liberty to keep the agreement private if they want to. It can be helpful for the manager to see it, and we would often encourage them to make sure that the referrer or manager or somebody locally is aware just of what's been agreed, not of what's been discussed, but just of the very brief bullet points about their future focused agreement. And if they consent to doing that, then that can help the process along a bit. But their discussions remain private. So just before we go on and talk about the behavioural plan or the deal, just had a couple of questions. One of them's come by email from Tracy. Tracy, thanks very much. Who says, what happens if you have employees who just don't want to have dialogue with each other? What would your advice be? Well, there's a requirement in the workplace, Tracy. It's a very good question, because sometimes people are quite reluctant to come into these processes, but there is a requirement in the workplace that people do the jobs that they've been contracted to do, and often that requires communicating positively and politely with colleagues. So if the organisation needs to act on a working relationship, the organisation has a few options, and they may consider performance measures, they may consider disciplinary issues. If it's coming from the employees themselves, then perhaps what they are minded to do is to invoke the organisation's grievance procedure. As mediators, of course, we encourage people very much to try a more collaborative approach, a more constructive approach first, before we get into the more sanction-based, the more past-focused, more adversarial processes like grievances, etc. So what we would encourage people to do is to come to the table and to have a conversation But at the heart of your question, it says with people who don't want to have dialogue with each other, the organisation would need to make a call there about whether they've given those employees a reasonable instruction to collaborate with one another, and offered them the support to make that happen. And some organisations would consider that failing to follow a reasonable instruction, like talk to your colleague in a constructive way, would actually be a disciplinary issue. For other organisations, perhaps they would offer a stronger encouragement. But where I would draw the line, Tracy, if people don't want to talk to each other, is if you force them into talking to each other, often it creates a difficult situation of itself. But that said, having done this for about 22 years, I've seen a lot of people walk towards mediations or facilitated conversations where they don't really want to be there, but as the session progresses, as the day progresses, they will turn their attention to the other party, realise they're both in the same boat, sometimes, call me cynical, but realise if they don't do this, their jobs might be at jeopardy, and they do actually start to have a decent conversation with their colleague. So I hope that answers your question, Tracy. It's a good question. So the behavioural plan, this is the last bit that we're going to look at on the videos. So let's have a think about building an agreement between these two parties. We've had our uninterrupted time to speak. We've had a private session with each of them. We've built some dialogue. We've been getting the conversation going around a future focus, around their needs, around this idea about collaboration more than competition. Now it's time to build some kind of an agreement between these two guys as an output to this process. So I've taken your points off the flip chart and put them onto the draft of an agreement. I just need to pin down one or two things so that make sure that they're actionable, make sure that they are actually going to happen when you get back to the office. So in terms of keeping the volume down for phone conversations, that's pretty straightforward. The social lunch, is one of you going to sort of put a note around about that the next time there's a birthday or something?
Yeah, I think if you want to.
Yeah, shall I do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so Sally put for the memo around social lunch. The next time, let's have a lunch rather than going out for drinks.
Yeah.
And in terms of you telling Sally when you're going to put your headphones on, so you're just going to catch her eye, indicate that the headphones are going on. That's fine. We've got that one. All of these things, can it start straight away? There's nothing in the way.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that we need to defer or anything. It can be straight
So
away.
I've got the start time on there as well.
Yeah, I can do the
great.
list on Monday. Yeah.
Fine. So I've got that on your agreement. It's not binding. It's just something that's here in good faith, really. Something that if the two of you try and make it work, it'll work. So I'll give that to you now to sign. You just sign it to say that you agree to the form of words that we've come up with.
Yeah.
And then we're pretty well finished.
Yeah.
So shall I hand that to you and you can have a read of it. Just make sure you agree with those words. And then we'll hand it to Heather and then we're done.
Yeah. Just sign here.
Yes, please. Yeah. And Heather, take a look at that if you're happy with that form of words as well.
Yeah, do I just sign at the side or
just
below?
Next to Sally's, yeah.
No.
So there's how they would approach their agreement or behavioural plan. And just to remind you that this is something that they have come up with. It's not about the facilitator arbitrating or imposing an agreement or even making suggestions. So these are the things that they themselves have arrived at as a way to better collaborate, better understand each other, better stay out of conflict with one another. And it's as a consequence of the mediator being there as an impartial catalyst. So just to really reinforce that point, it tends to be a popular myth and legend about mediation is that it's the practitioner who comes up with the agreement. It isn't. It's very much them coming up with their own agreement or behavioural plan so that this is how they will bring their conflict to a close. And as I mentioned before, it's specific and measurable and achievable, realistic and time-orientated action points that they have volunteered to take part in, and they decide who gets to see it. So that's the output from this process. So we're near the end really, and that's a very quick skip through how in these times of change where people find their jobs have been restructured, they've got new people in the department, their own role has changed, perhaps their duties and responsibilities have been tweaked a little. These two guys are working face to face here. We could easily have simulated it around an online situation as well. In fact, there's a different webinar that we do about online mediation where you will see a similar process playing out over a Zoom meeting. And these are the ways that we would try and build dialogue between people at times of change in order to get them back to a place where they're collaborating, communicating, staying out of conflict, and not having that kind of aggravation with each other. So that's the end of my presentation, and if there are any further questions, we've quite a few questions here. So Charlotte, thanks very much. Hi Mike, in your experience, what sort of change makes for the worst disputes? I bet you've seen some cases in your time. Well, personally I have. I've done about 1,200 cases over the last 22 years, so there are quite a few different examples, but we've got a panel out there, about 10 mediators who respond to these kinds of things all the time, distributed around the UK and beyond, of course. And we see all sorts of change. I think it's where people feel that there is an unfair distribution of work. I think that might be one of the top things I would refer to, Charlotte. So where after a restructure, one individual feels as if they're doing two people's jobs and feel as if all the cushy roles have been given to other people, and especially if those other people are newer into the department. I think we are often quite attentive to how fairly the work is shared out between us and other individuals, and how the more responsible, more taxing, more rewarding jobs are shared out in particular. So I think where there's a sense of unfairness around that, and where people have not been involved in the process by which the change has been arrived at, I think that's a particular source of friction. So where people feel as if it's been imposed rather than negotiated, those seem to be particularly heated situations. So in short, Charlotte, we need to pay very close attention to a fair distribution of work following change or reorganisation or restructure, and a sense that people are included in the dialogue around what needs to change and how it's going to change, so that they don't feel as if it's just been given to them fait accompli at the end of that process. But great questions, thanks very much. So I think we'll move on. I did say about 45 minutes. We're up there now. So we have some webinars coming up around the corner. In October, we're talking about neighbourhood disputes and nightmare neighbours. We've all got neighbours. Most of them are lovely, some aren't. And I'll be looking at the use of these similar techniques in terms of neighbourhood mediation on Friday 15th of October. And then our next one is about culture, conflict and collaboration. Very interesting in the context of diversity and inclusion, how we are able to respond to issues of culture and conflict, and in particular how we get people collaborating across, in the widest definition of culture, across different characteristics and aspirations. And the last one will be about homelessness prevention. So we often do this one in December when it gets cold, looking at the use of mediation with families in crisis to look at how we can prevent, particularly youngsters, being ejected from family homes, and preventing homelessness using these similar techniques. And that'll be on Friday 10th of December. And I've got one question that's snuck in at the end there, so we'll do that. Susan Casey. Susan, thank you very much. Does the mediator ever review the plan, and what happens if the plan breaks down? Very good question, Susan. We do routinely follow people up after 6 weeks. So we would be in touch with the participating individuals discreetly by email after 6 weeks and say, how's it going? Is the agreement working? If it is mostly on track, if they've mostly managed to stay out of conflict with their colleague and they're okay and they don't need any further intervention, then that's great. But sometimes they do say, actually, it's gone a little bit belly up and we do need a bit of further support, in which case it goes back to the referrer, and then we may be asked to come in again for a second round of mediation. The other thing to say, Susan, is that we do encourage the parties to show their agreement and behavioural contract to somebody locally, the manager in this case, so that the manager can monitor and check that the agreement is holding up, doesn't need to be revised, that they are actually keeping to the terms of the agreement. So as external mediators, we try and leave that with the organisation and make sure the local manager is aware of what's been agreed so that they can support their agreement. But occasionally it does come back to us for a second round of mediation. But in short, yeah, we do like to keep an eye on it, Susan, and not just leave them in case they go into free fall again. Right, excellent. Thank you very much for your attention, everybody, today, and your questions and comments. It's been really, really enjoyable. This has been our webinar about building dialogue in difficult times. Thanks very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great weekend.